Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack complex research to give you the insights you need. Today we're tackling something huge, a really ambitious goal. Can the entire American continent, north and south, run entirely on renewable energy? And not just eventually, but feasibly, affordably, by 2030.
That's the scale, all right? A massive question. And for this, we're focusing on one key piece of research. It's titled Analyzing the Feasibility of Powering the Americas with Renewable Energy and Interregional Grid Interconnections by 2030.
That title alone tells you the scope is pretty enormous.
It really is, and we need to put it in context right away. This is actually an older paper, came out back in 2019, which, in the world of renewables R&D, that's quite a while ago.
Things move fast in this field.
They really do. So the way they approached this was interesting. They used what's called an overnight approach. Basically, they weren't trying to map out every single step or political challenge.
Okay. So less of a roadmap, more of a destination check.
Exactly. They modeled a cost-optimized, fully renewable energy system for the year 2030, using really detailed weather data, high-resolution stuff both spatially and temporally. The whole idea was just to see, in principle, could this incredibly ambitious scenario actually work? Is it fundamentally possible?
Got it. So not how do we build it tomorrow, but more like if we could build it, would it make sense technically and economically?
Precisely. And the really fascinating part, the sort of central question this study digs into, is about connection. Could these huge grid interconnections spanning North, Central, and South America be the key to solving that classic renewable problem intermittency? The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow.
Can geography basically smooth out the bumps in renewable generation?
That's the core idea they tested.
All right, let's get into the economics then.
Yeah.
This study looked at different ways this could be set up, right? Different scenarios.
Yes, they modeled a range. It went from a very decentralized setup, what they called the region-wide scenario. Think of each region basically fending for itself, no power exchange.
Right, isolated energy islands.
Kind of, all the way to the other extreme, the fully interconnected area-wide scenario where electricity could flow freely across the whole continent.
Okay, so from totally separate to totally linked. And what were the cost implications? What did the numbers show?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Regardless of how connected the system was, the overall costs were, frankly, surprisingly low. The levelized cost of electricity, the LCOE, across all these different setups landed between about 48.8 and 59 euros per megawatt hour.
59 euros per megawatt hour, even in the most expensive isolated scenario.
That's right. Even back in 2019 modeling for 2030, that puts 100% renewables squarely in competition with traditional power sources.
Okay, but the real magic happens when you start connecting things, I imagine.
Yeah.
What difference did moving from that isolated region-wide model to the fully linked area-wide one make?
Huge difference. The efficiency gains were significant. Just by letting power flow to where it's needed most efficiently across the continent, the LCOE, that levelized cost, it dropped by 14%.
14% lower cost just by building the transmission lines.
And maybe even more importantly, the total annual system cost, like the overall price tag for building and running the whole thing each year, that dropped by 15%.
15%. On a project this size, that's billions. Potentially hundreds of billions saved.
Absolutely. It really highlights how coordination and sharing resources across regions can slash costs. You avoid having to overbuild generation everywhere.
Makes sense. Smarter infrastructure pays off.
And they pushed that idea even further. They also modeled what they called the integrated scenario.
Integrated? What does that mean?
It means they connected the electricity sector to other big energy users, things like large-scale seawater desalination plants or providing hydrogen for industrial processes, that kind of thing.
Sector coupling. Using electricity for more than just lights and computers.
Exactly. And by creating these extra demands that could soak up excess renewable power when it was available, they introduced even more flexibility into the system. And guess what? That dropped the LCOE by another 4%.
So connection saves 14%, and then integrating other sectors saves another 4%. It all adds up.
It really does. Treating electricity as this flexible resource that can power other critical needs makes the whole system cheaper and more efficient to run. Now, one of the most maybe counterintuitive findings here is what all this connection does to energy storage needs.
Right, because if the grid is moving power around efficiently, you maybe don't need as many giant batteries everywhere.
That's exactly it. The transmission grid itself starts acting like a form of, spatial storage. It smooths out the supply across huge areas, and the result is you need dramatically less actual physical storage capacity built.
Okay, let's get specific. How much did the storage needs drop when comparing that isolated system to the fully connected one?
The numbers are pretty stark. Take ACA's adiabatic compressed air energy storage. That's typically for really long duration storage, potentially seasonal.
Storing energy for weeks or months.
Right. In the isolated region-wide scenario, the model needed a fair bit of it. But once you interconnected the whole area, the need for ACA's capacity dropped by nearly 100%.
Wow, basically wiped out. Why?
Because the geographic diversity does the job instead. If it's cloudy in one place, it's sunny somewhere else, the wind dies down here, it's blowing strong over there. Connecting those diverse regions effectively replaces the need for that super long-term, expensive storage.
So the grid handles the seasonal balancing. What about shorter-term storage, like daily ups and downs?
Even there, the needs plummeted. Large-scale battery storage capacity, down by 59%, and the capacity needed for water electrolysis that's making hydrogen or synthetic gas from excess power to gas, that also dropped by 59%.
Okay, so the grid is king. It drastically reduces the need for storage across the board. What does that mean for the actual power generation? What technologies dominate in this optimized system?
It becomes very clear. The system heavily favors solar PV, specifically the kind that uses single-axis tracking.
Ah, the panels that follow the sun. Why those specifically?
It just comes down to efficiency, the full load hours. Those tracking systems in the model generated power for about 2,086 hours per year at full capacity. Compare that to fixed tilt panels, which only managed around 1,651 hours.
So they just produce significantly more energy over the year.
Exactly. And in a cost-optimized model, the system naturally leans towards the most productive, cheapest sources. So it's tracking PV and onshore wind. Those are the big two.
And what about concentrated solar power, CSP, the mirror-based systems?
Plays a negligible role, actually. The study found that for the projected 2030 costs they used, standard PV combined with battery storage was simply much more cost-effective. So CSP basically got pushed out of the optimal mix.
Okay, so we had this interconnected system dominated by wind and tracking PV with much less storage needed. Let's talk about the flow. Who's sending power where? Where are the big energy highways?
Yeah, the interconnected scenarios, both the area-wide and the integrated one, they paint a really clear picture of regional roles emerging. Canada East stands out. It becomes the major generation hub, the primary exporter for the continent.
Canada East. Why there specifically?
Incredible wind resources, just fantastic conditions. They calculated the full load hours for wind turbines there at around 3,700 hours.
3,700 hours. That's more than 40% of the entire year the turbines are running at full tilt.
Pretty much. It's exceptional. So in the integrated scenario, that region ends up exporting something like 711 terawatt hours of electricity annually.
711 terawatt hours. And where does most of that power go?
The biggest customer by far is the U.S. Northeast. That region becomes the major importer, taking in up to 873 terawatt hours in the integrated model.
Okay.
A lot of that is coming straight down from Canada East. This Canada-U.S. Northeast connection is like the superhighway driving a lot of those efficiency gains we talked about.
Makes sense. So a huge North American trade flow. What about South America? Is it a similar picture down there?
Actually, no. It's quite different. South America sees much lower levels of electricity trade between its regions compared to North America.
Oh, why is that? Don't they have good resources too?
They absolutely do. Excellent hydro, great wind, fantastic solar potential. That's part of the reason. They have abundant, diverse resources locally. Combine that with generally lower overall electricity demand compared to the north, and crucially, the vast distances between major cities or load centers.
Ah, the geography works against long-distance transmission there.
To some extent, yes. The model finds that because resources are so good locally, it's often cheaper to just use local storage batteries, hydro reservoirs, to balance supply and demand within a region, rather than building incredibly long, expensive transmission lines across, say, the Amazon or the Andes.
Okay, this leads us perfectly into what you call the Pan-American paradox. The big dream was this single grid connecting Tierra del Fuego to the Arctic, right? But the model suggests the South American part was less integrated. So what about the actual link between North and South America? What value did that provide?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most surprising findings. That final interconnection, the one bridging Central America to Mexico's south, essentially linking the two continents electrically, it provided only a very marginal benefit.
Marginal? How marginal?
We're talking a reduction of just 1.6% in the total annual system cost compared to running two separate but internally well-connected continental grids.
1.6%. That's tiny. especially considering the likely cost and complexity of building that intercontinental link.
Exactly. It suggests that the massive investment required for that specific connection might not deliver proportional economic benefits.
So why was it so, underwhelming?
Well, a few things. First, the sheer distance involved is enormous, making the transmission infrastructure incredibly costly. Second, the physical connection point in the model was somewhat limited, basically linking just one specific region in Mexico to Central America. And third, as we just discussed, local energy storage in South America proved quite cost competitive against importing power over those vast distances. The grid connection just didn't get used enough across that specific link to justify its cost in the model.
So the economics just didn't quite pencil out for that final piece of the puzzle. Did the study look at other ways to trade energy between continents? Maybe not electricity, but like fuels?
It did, yeah. They looked at one specific scenario involving synthetic natural gas, or SNG. The idea was, could you use cheap renewables in, say, Patagonia, Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, have great resources, produce SNG there, liquefy it into LNG, ship it up to Houston in the U.S. Southwest, and have it be cost-effective.
So trading green gas instead of green electrons, how did that pan out?
It didn't, really.
Yeah.
The model showed negligible SNG transfer between the continents.
Negligible. Why? Was it too expensive?
Yes. The fundamental problem was the cost of liquefaction. Just chilling that gas down to turn it into a liquid for shipping that step alone accounted for something like 65% of the entire cost of getting that gas from Patagonia to Houston. By the time the synthetic LNG arrived, its cost was basically the same as just producing SNG locally in Houston using local renewables. There was no economic advantage.
So the energy cost of converting and transporting the fuel killed the trade route.
Pretty much. Another example where distance and conversion losses really matter.
Okay, so we've seen how interconnection saves money, how it changes storage, the trade patterns. But the ultimate question, the real so what here is, how does this whole 100% renewable vision stack up against just not doing it? How does it compare to the business as usual, the BAU scenario for 2030?
Right, this is the bottom line. Is going fully renewable actually cheaper than sticking with our current trajectory of fossil fuels mixed with some renewables? Let's see the final comparison from this study. The results are quite definitive based on their 2030 projections. Taking their most efficient renewable model, the fully connected area-wide scenario, it comes out as 25% lower in total annual cost than the projected BAU scenario for 2030.
Hold on, 25% cheaper. And that's without even putting a price on carbon emissions or pollution.
Correct. That 25% saving is based purely on the projected costs of building and operating the systems. No climate costs factored in there at all.
That's kind of staggering. Building this entirely new continent-spanning renewable infrastructure is potentially fundamentally cheaper than just keeping the old system running and incrementally adding.
That's what the cost projections in this 2019 study indicated for the year 2030. It makes a strong economic case, not just an environmental one. And of course, if you do factor in the cost of greenhouse gas emissions,
Then the gap must get even wider.
significantly wider. The study applied a carbon cost. It was around 59.8 euros per ton of CO2, which is, a reasonable estimate. When you add that cost to the BAU scenario, the fully interconnected renewable system becomes 43% cheaper.
43%. So the economic argument becomes overwhelming once you account for climate damage.
Absolutely. The cost of pollution really tips the scales dramatically in favor of the renewable pathway. And just to underline the core point, the study also found that even their least efficient renewable scenario, the completely isolated region-wide one with all its expensive redundant storage,
Even that one.
was still calculated to be lower in cost than the business as usual scenario, again, before adding any carbon costs.
Wow. So no matter how you slice it within the renewable framework they modeled, it came out ahead economically compared to BAU 2030.
That's the clear synthesis from this particular piece of research. It concludes that a 100% renewable energy system for the Americas is not only technically feasible by 2030, but also cost-effective and reliable, driven mainly by those plummeting costs of solar PV and onshore wind, and made efficient by optimized regional grids and smart deployment of storage. So that was our deep dive into the study, analyzing the feasibility of powering the Americas with renewable energy and interregional grid interconnections by 2030. A fascinating look, even if from a few years back.
Absolutely. And the key takeaways really stick with you. First, 100% renewables look cost competitive, even potentially cheaper than business as usual for 2030 based on these projections. Second, strong regional grid connections are crucial. They dramatically cut the need for expensive storage. But third, That final, ultimate step linking North and South America into one supergrid seems to offer surprisingly minimal extra economic benefit, mostly due to the immense distances involved.
Which does leave us with a final thought for you to consider.
If the biggest bang for the buck, the major cost savings and efficiency gains, come from strengthening those regional ties, like the Canada-US Northeast example, rather than the massive transcontinental links, how should nations prioritize their infrastructure spending over the coming critical decade? Do you focus on the achievable, high-return regional projects for speed and definite savings? Or do you still aim for that maximum continent-spanning grid, even if the final, most ambitious links offer only marginal returns? Where does the smart money go? Something to think about as these huge investment decisions are made across the hemisphere.